Welcome to Tuesday evening movement principles class. Today we will be exploring the concept of scatter and gather, which is quite a large frame that Laban speaks of in his writing as quite kind of broad categories that later become more differentiated and teased apart. And we'll look at it from a body connectivity perspective and from a question of posture or of gesture. And so the scatter and gather in these words that I'm using fit into the kind of bigger taxonomy of Laban movement analysis, or the Laban Bartenieff Movement System, which is this comprehensive toolbox of ideas of movement. And these classes are me putting them together in different ways or exploring a few concepts. And the way that we will explore them is through quite a lot of free movement. So I'll give some tasks and ideas, and it'll be a question of you figuring out what you want to do with that instruction. And then sometimes it'll be more guided using what is known as the Bartenieff fundamentals. So really easy patterns of movement that you can have a look at the screen, and I'll be doing them as well. And unlike a yoga class even, or a dance class, I mean, sometimes yoga classes are taught in this way, but really in this class, there's no goal. The goal is really to research and explore and do what you do. And it's really not about looking cool or interesting or, like none of those things matter. This is like a movement research hour of you and me in our front rooms, or your studios if you have one, having a little explore of what you find. And so there's space at the end of the session for kind of discussion and questions, or maybe halfway if there's a good moment. So scatter and gather, if we had space to, we can try it in the small space that we have. I would like to do the exercise that I did with Warren Lamb, of all people. Now, if you've studied any Laban, Warren Lamb was a student of Laban's and then a colleague, and I had the great pleasure of him coming to teach as a guest on my Laban movement analysis training more than 10 years ago. He sadly passed away since then. Tiny little old man, beautiful man that did the diagonal scale every day for like the whole of his life. And we started a session with him doing what felt like a very Isadora Duncan style warm-up. So this is as dancey as it's going to get, actually, of scattering and gathering down the room. Now, I don't have a lot of space to do this. So you're going to have to like improvise your directions and just change around when you need to. But let's start with some classical scatter and gather in the Isadora style, just to get moving with something quite silly. Really don't take it too seriously. And then we'll go onto the floor and do some more kind of eyes closed, inner sensing stuff. But for now, it goes like this. Gather and scatter, gather and scatter. And gather and scatter. That's basically it. So play around with gathering and scattering however you wish, and channel some sort of Isadora Duncan barefooted long dresses dancing in the sun feeling, if you like, but get your body into this feeling of what it is to gather things in and scatter them out again. And I've got a little hop in mind, but yours might not have the elevation. It might be more without the hop. And so have a little play with this scattering and gathering. I find it very funny. And I don't know why. And I think is because it has a swing feeling, and you don't stay in one of these images for so long before the next one arrives. And so there's this inherent exertion recuperation in this. And notice what happens with your eyes, with your breath, with your sense of weight, your sense of flow. And already, you can start exploring scattering and gathering in different directions, in different levels. It's quite exerting after a while, you know. Hopefully you can feel the blood moving, a bit warmer. Oh, and we did it in pairs, down the diagonals of the room in very classic dance style. God, it was a very nice time. Okay, that's enough of that. Please bring yourself down to the ground. And we can explore a bit scatter gather in a much quieter range with this simple pattern of starting in a big X position on the ground on your back and then easily rolling to one side, gathering in limbs towards core. And you can inhale and allow an easy unfolding of your limbs back to where you started. Exhaling, supporting this sense of folding and rolling, leaving a print of where you were on the ground. And this has hardly got a scattering feeling in it. This is more of a spread. As your limbs can unfold, spine can uncurl. And so easily, slowly, fluidly, slowing down for a moment to find this pouring of your body's weight from one side to the other. Sense of condensing and expanding. You may wish to close your eyes a little bit to sense this more closely. And really aiming to do this with as little exertion as possible. So how can your limbs slide or roll on the ground rather than needing to be lifted off to get you into a small ball? And so we can coordinate hands and feet, head and tail, activated at the same time. All parts of you joining in, nothing getting left behind. And then you can take this into some rolling of your own choice now. It doesn't have to be this pattern of coordination of precisely bringing hands and feet and head and tail, and just go ahead and roll however you'd like to roll. Feeling the fluid contents of your body shift. This mobile container of skin. Sensing how you sense this shift of weight from moment to moment. The sense of contacting the ground, making contact somewhere else. Finding the sense of three-dimensionality of your body, so the roundness of the back of the skull, curves of the rib cage. How even you can roll along the length of the arm, across the back of the hand. Sensing the curves of the legs, volume of calf, volume of the bone of the heel. So an easy sense of pouring, imprinting. We'll come back to more condensing and expanding in a moment. But using this time to arrive in the sense of the whole of your body. Making contact with the floor in different ways. Rolling, connecting. And finding yourself on your front. And supporting your upper body with forearms bent, palms on the ground. You might want to be a little bit longer or a little bit shorter, depending on how your lower back feels. And you can find a little pressure through the hands to activate a rock from the upper body. Finding this pressing of the forearms into the ground to find a shift down into the ground and back and forth, headward, tailward. And then let that go, relax your head. Tuck your toes underneath and find a little rock from the balls of the feet. Sending that information through to the skull. And you might want to explore with back of hands on the ground, head on back of hands. And then find the hands on the ground and find a push from feet to hands, feet to hands, feet to hands. So we're activating through the upper body, through the shoulder girdle, connecting palms into shoulders, finding a sense of length of skull, and from heels into sitting bones, into tailbone, mediated by the long length of spine, and then releasing when you're ready, taking a little pause. And then starting at the feet, into the legs, into the tailbone. You can roll yourself from lower body, rolling over so that eventually you find yourself on your back again. And we can take the legs long, maybe a little bit more narrow, and setting up a heel rock. So the activation of flexing and extending through the ankle joints. Anchoring the bones of the heels into the ground so you find a rock, the same rock that you found on your front, now happening from the heels through to the skull. Can you make this happen with as minimal muscular effort as possible? So you might feel like you need to let go in your jaw, in the chest, in the belly. Maybe it feels like a lot of exertion in the thighs or in the hip flexors, and then just let your legs go. And starting again when you're ready. Let's maybe find the end of an exhale to initiate. And you may feel like there's a lot of tension building around the fronts of the shins or the backs of the calves to do this. Seeing if you can make it more smooth. Can you visualize all the vertebrae? All the bones of the spine beginning to mobilize, to float, to be rolled. And then letting that go. Taking a little pause and noticing how you sense your body on the ground now. And we'll refine this big X, small O pattern and pay attention really to the exploration of spine. So finding how it grows and how it shrinks. So almost a sense of the spine rising to expand, even though you stay connected to the ground. and then sinking to make you small. A sense of the spine elongating, and then shortening, sinking. And the arms and the legs are just going to come along for the ride. It's really more about spine now. Head and tail both dynamically involved in this shortening towards the navel center. And then a lengthening towards feet and towards hands. Couple more of those, really paying attention to the activity of spine getting shorter. Sure, there's also a flexion going on as you round the back, but really trying to sense into the gaps in the vertebrae getting smaller. And then allowing the movement of spine to unfold you onto the ground. And then go ahead in your own way, rolling again, shortening and expanding through spine. So you might come into a little ball, you might even come up to sit, playing a little bit with this sense of rising or lengthening with spine, shrinking and shortening with spine. Might take you onto different surfaces. And so we're playing with this head-tail connection, but through this progression of the shape of spine changing. Rising and sinking might be in space, or it might be simply at the level of how you're experiencing your spine sinking towards head, towards pelvis. Rising away from the ground. Okay. And then let's re-find ourselves back on our back. And this time, as you find a roll to one side, really now paying attention to the enclosing. And I mentioned the word earlier, spreading. And we can find its kind of opposite of enclosing. We're really taking the time to feel that progression to become enclosed. And then spreading this process. Finding some space in the hips and the shoulders and the proximal joints. And then enclosing. Really much more about the process than where you end up. So indulging in time to sense that shape change. And you might find it supported by breath, exhaling to condense, to enclose, inhaling to spread. Sense even maybe the rib cage narrowing towards itself, towards the midline. And this widening of breath, helping us find even more sense of spread. Great. And then go ahead in your own way of playing with spreading and enclosing. That might take you onto different surfaces. It might take you to sitting, onto all fours. Continuing to indulge in that time to sense the progression of one side, maybe enclosing to the other side. So the spreading might also be sensed even right through to the hands and the feet. Okay, and then let's find ourselves on our back a third time for another possibility of these different qualities of shape change. We found a bit more rising and sinking of spine. We just found enclosing and spreading. Let's now find advancing and retreating. So we're going to do this X's and O thing in a slightly different way. Allow your whole spine to advance. And then you're going to have to enclose a little bit to get into a small ball. And then you can allow your spine to go forward, to advance, to flex. And then find a sense of the spine retreating to bring your limbs in. And you can carry on retreating to go backwards to bring you onto your back. So how is it to find the spine advancing, or the pubic bone and the breastbone advancing, coming more into this arch shape? And then allow spine to retreat. And then allow spine to carry on retreating to bring you back onto your big X position. So often I teach this with the head and the tail coming towards navel center as the part of the initiation, and here is something very different, to find a real flexion through the spine. It's feels very different to find this sense of advancing, but lying on my side in order to lie on my side. And then retreating through spine to condense, carry on retreating through the spine to return to the big X. So if that first advancing feels really uncomfortable, do what you need to do with your limbs around you to make it feel more stable. For example, I'm finding my legs are splitting and one foot is supporting me here. I'm not like hanging out with my foot off the ground. If I feel like my 2 feet come forward, I can't find as much of this sensation through the lower body. Have a little play with this.
But Ali, that's extension, not flexion, right?
Yeah, that is an extension of the spine. Is it? No, it's an extension of the front of the spine. And then here is a flexion of the spine coming into a ball. Thank you. And then we can find advancing and retreating through the spine to bring you into a small ball. Bouncing through the spine to bring you forward again. Play in your own way with how you can experience this spinal flexion and extension, but with this added image of advancing. So there is an interest in going forward or going backwards, and we're using the body key rather than the room as the key. So if I'm sitting, my advancing, sure, could be like this. Am I retreating more like this? And I'm exploring that potential not only through the breastbone, but through the pelvis, through the pubic symphysis. And then the sense of retreating back of skull, back of sacrum. And again, indulging in the time it takes to advance. So advancing will eventually reach some sort of end point. And there's your information to start retreating from. Advancing and retreating. Okay, so finding in your own way a little moment of going through all three of those again, and you might find them overlapping. Rising, sinking, spreading, closing, advancing, retreating, spreading, and just carry on your own little journey, making sure that you visit all of them in different ways, in different surfaces. And if you haven't found a way of coming out of the floor onto different bases of support, different points of contact with the ground, make sure that you explore that a little bit. Hand and hand to the ground, hand and shins. Seeing where you can pour into. So there's a sense of your body's forming the space around it. Okay. Eventually, we'll meet on 2 feet standing, but take your time to get there. So let's find rising and going up and sinking and going down. Seems very obvious, but let's put it together that way. So rising and sinking. However you wish, feet can be wider, closer. You might just go straight up and down, one axis. Might do a bit more side-sidedness, but feeling the progression of spine rising and sinking. I occasionally like to place my hands there as a reminder. Two ends of the spine. Head sinking towards tail, tail sinking towards ground. Rising might include arms and hands reaching. Super, now let's do the opposite. Let's do rising, but going down, and sinking and going up. So I'm gonna sink and try and go upwards at the same time. Gonna rise and go downwards. Oh, sinking and going upwards. Rising and going down. It's so strange, but quite interesting. So playing with that a little bit more in your own way. Sinking and going upwards. Rising and going down. Okay, and then just go back to another few rising and sinkings without the disaffinity of space. So rising, going up, sinking, going down. Maybe that feels more easy, more familiar, less interesting. Okay, it's fine with spreading and enclosing, so I'm going to enclose to begin. And spread. Try and do a little shift side to side. I might enclose more towards my right side, and my left side can spread away from my left. Left side can spread away from right. And I can try that on both sides. So if I keep one point more fixed, the other side can move towards and away from it. Or I could step onto that side also. So not losing that progression of spreading and enclosing. So how are we going to disafine this? Well, I'm going to enclose and try and travel sideways and keep traveling. Enclose and keep traveling. I'm going to spread and try not go anywhere. Enclose and keep traveling, whatever that means. And then spread and don't go very far. And then allow yourself to find the kind of defined version of space. So enclosing, finding a good old proper enclose, no traveling. And then you can find a spread that involves even more side-sidedness, even more voyaging out to some further edges of your space, of your kinesphere. And making sure that you have breath support for this exploration. Okay, next, advancing. So we had all this action through spine. I'll show you sideways. I can be on the spot finding advancing and retreating. And I can find advancing and traveling forward, retreating and traveling backwards. Give yourself a little exploration of that. So there's a little bit more locomotion as you advance and retreat. And it might be both head and pelvis leading. You could also find more in the lower or more in the upper. And then let's just define. So let's have advancing in the shape change of the torso, traveling backwards. Or retreating and traveling forwards. Advancing with spine or traveling backwards. Or finding a retreating and traveling forwards. Again, it's quite hard to get the timing of making sure that I'm still advancing whilst traveling, as opposed to I'm advanced and then I'm just stepping, which is possible, but I'm trying to give myself the challenge of traveling and advancing at the same time, and retreating and traveling forwards. And then put them back together again so they are fine, advancing and traveling forwards, retreating, traveling backwards. And then we'll put them in together in different ways in a minute. But just for yourself, revisit them, explore them, play with them. We have rising, sinking, spreading, and closing. Advancing, retreating, just in your own way, have a little play. And they don't have to be on vertical on your feet, they can be back in a different orientation to gravity. What did I do to just get there? I sank and advanced, right? So all of this is appropriate for wherever you are in space. Have a little play with whatever comes in terms of these shape qualities. And you might find this affinity of traveling helps extend some of that experience of your core shape change. Maybe it's just one more ingredient that's not needed now. Okay. We'll put them actually back into some work on the floor. So if you want to bring yourself down, maybe sink the spine and find a way of getting down into the supine hook position. So this knees bent, flat on the floor position. Feet are in parallel, not too wide, not too close. Knees not too unbent, but not super, super tight. Somewhere comfortable that you can release. You can maybe press even into the thighs and have a sense of allowing the feet to receive your legs. And we'll take the arms to the side. And so the feet are going to stay on those footprints. Carry the weight of the knees over to one side. And allow the spine to turn to see the opposite hand. And you can take your hands a little higher than shoulder height, so they're more in this kind of X position where we were earlier. And from here, rolling back of skull, back of sacrum, rib cage finds the ground. And other side, knees carried over more to the long below diagonal, seeing towards the opposite hand. And as you exhale, having a sense of spine returning to the ground, very small retreating in the pelvis. And again. Knees over to one side, head turns. Weight of pelvis is carried so that one side is more in contact with the ground and the other side is peeled off somewhat. And exhaling here. Navel center retreating back to the ground, knees floating out, back of skull coming with you. One more of those. This time let's pause. And find some activation through the right hand, and then allow the hand and the arm to rise above the head and then enclose across you. Carry on circling your hand towards your knees and then find the hand and the arm spreading out to the side. Spine rises, sense of enclosing, spreading and retreating. And you can allow the lower body this time to come with you a little bit more, rolling maybe to shorten, to sink. Hand keeps going. Spreading. And so skull can stay on the ground or it can peel off a little bit. And by that I mean seeing the hand by lifting skull. Finding the circling of the arm that affects the rib cage, that affects the spine and pelvis. And finding our shape qualities here with a sense of rising, shortening, enclosing, spreading, retreating. And then you can change the direction of the arm. Enclosing across your torso, hand reaching towards the other hand, and then this spreading and rising of spine, slight retreating of breastbone as you come around to find hand close to the ground or on the ground. Keep circling the hand. So finding this knee drop and arm circle with more of an attention to the core shape change that's taking place. So it's not really only about the arm, but the circling of the arm informing the rest of the body. And then this time finding the back of the hand on the ground. Inhale to prepare. Exhaling, bringing skull and pelvis back to the center and just compare any sensation you might feel between the arm that had been circling and the other arm. And then we'll do the second side, knees over to one side, eyes turning skull to the other hand. And begin circling the arm on this side, sense of spine rising and then sinking and closing. Carry on tracing a peripheral pathway of the hand around your body. With this additional sensitivity to what your spine is doing, enclosing, shrinking a little, shortening. Sense of retreating here, spreading. And then changing the direction. And again, maybe skull can come off the ground a little. Maybe even as you take The enclosing across your body, sense of the pelvis coming with you, more of an enclosing in the lower body. And then as you bring the arm up over your head, there's more of a sense of spreading in the upper than in the lower. Okay. And let's this time find a roll to the side, rolling onto your front, coming back into this sort of Sphinx position that we found earlier, and just check in again and see how that feels. Pushing hands to feet, feet to hands. After having done all the shape change through the spine, now finding more of a length in the spine and in the front. A little recuperation from all this shape change. And then release. And then find a way to bring yourself onto all fours. And then to sitting. Okay. I mentioned a thing called the diagonal scale earlier. This is just going to be a little taster, and I'm going to share it through shape change. So these qualities that we've been playing with. You can sit on the floor, you can sit on a ball, you can sit on a chair, up to you, but we don't need to do with the feet. So if you want to sit like this, that's also possible. Something that's comfortable, where you can have a little bit of shifting. So let's find rising, spreading, advancing, retreating, sinking, enclosing. Just do that a few times. Now, you might be doing this really in the center of your spine, but we can add a little bit of side in this. Rising, spreading, advancing, retreating, enclosing, sinking. And imagine I could say all those three words at the same time. So they're all happening at the same time, rather than rising, spreading, and advancing. So see if you can just put them together. Rising, spreading, advancing, sinking, retreating, enclosing. And you can find that in a few different directions in your kinesphere and the space around you. Rise, spread, advance, retreat, sink, and close. You can even use your hands on the ground. Okay. And then let's go. Rising, advancing, enclosing. Sinking, retreating, spreading. Rising, enclosing, and advancing. Sinking, retreating, spreading. Playing with that a few more times in your own way. You might want to change where your legs are on the ground. So advancing and rising, but with enclosing. And then retreating, spreading, and sinking. Okay, and then let's try rising, retreating, enclosing. Advancing, sinking, spreading. Rising, retreating, enclosing. Sinking, spreading, advancing. Rising, retreating, enclosing. Sinking, spreading, advancing. Your hands can get involved if that helps. Okay, good. And the last one, let's go rising, spreading, retreating, enclosing, sinking, advancing, retreating, rising, and spreading, advancing, enclosing, sinking, spreading, retreating, rising, enclosing, advancing, sinking. It's a lot of words, sorry. Okay. Let's do those again. We did 8, and we did them all bind with the pulls of the diagonals, but we'll talk about that another time. Let's for now just go. Rise, advance, spread. Retreat, enclose, sink. Advance, rise, enclose. Retreat, sink, spread. Enclose, retreat, and rise. Advance, spread, sink. Retreat, spread, rise. Advance, enclose, sink. Bit of a tongue twister of body-mind. But for the next 5 minutes, whatever you remember from that, whatever traces of all of that are in your body, play in whatever way you wish. You might stay sitting, or you might come to standing, or you might go into lying, up to you. But we've got these different possible combinations, right, of spreading, advancing, rising, retreating, sinking, retreating, spreading. If it becomes very thinky and you're getting a bit lost in self-directing through words, and that's really not satisfying, just allow your body to lead. If you feel like going through them all again, I'm just going to name them, and then I'm going to shut up. So, rising, spreading, advancing, retreating, sinking, enclosing. Rising, advancing, enclosing. Retreating, sinking, spreading. Enclosing, rising, retreating. Advancing, sinking, spreading. Rising, retreating, spreading. Advancing, sinking, enclosing. And so in your own way, finding this scattering and gathering again, with slight possibility of different combinations. Maybe a sense of scatter, or of gather, with a little bit more dynamic change can come back. Just seeing where your body wants to take you, where these impulses of shape change want to be. And whether this has given you anything more to play with scattering and gathering we started with. And you might want to add in, as another option, rather than scatter, gather, you might want to play with gather, scatter, for example. Or scatter. Give yourself different kinds of patterns of phrasing, scatter, gather, if you like. Another thing to play with. if you're upstanding, eventually bring yourself back down to the ground with some scatter gathers to get you there. And we'll eventually find ourselves just in this X's and O's again, seeing how this feels now. Whether an image of gathering and scattering changes something about your experience of this, and how this work on core shape change might have been offering some different potential of how you organize from your core to your limbs, from spine into the arms and the legs. And the next time you find yourself on your side, take a little pause. And with a sigh, connect your hands into the ground, push yourself up to sit. Opening the eyes, seeing the space, and let's gather back at the computer screens for a little chat.